Hello guys, happy Sankranti and welcome back to the Futures and Option video series. In the last video, we started with options and we understood what exactly is the payout graph of an option buyer. And in this video, we'll be comparing the perspective of an option buyer and an option seller. So whenever we hear about the term called option buyer, so it's always said option buyer makes unlimited profit. Whereas whenever we speak about an option seller, they say the probability of winning of an option seller is 66.6 percentage, whereas the option buyer only makes 33.3 percentage of the time. So at the end of the day, they say option seller is the one who is going to make profit. So by the end of this video, we'll see if these two statements are entirely correct or not. So without any further delay, let's jump into the concepts. So let's continue with our last example, that is company XYZ, who had a lot size of 200 shares and the price was 5,000 rupees and the expiry date was 31st of January. The call options and put options were traded at 20 rupees each, right? So, like we discussed in the last session, the maximum profit which the buyer is going to make is infinity, right? Similarly, the maximum profit for put buyer will also be plus infinity, and the maximum loss is basically limited to only the premium which is paid, that is 20 rupees in this scenario, right? Similarly, the maximum loss would be, in this case also it's 20 rupees, right? So it's 20. But since the lot size is 200, so for each share, if you are losing 20 rupees, for 200 shares, it is going to be a loss of 4,000. Similarly, for put options also, the maximum loss is, second, yeah. So the maximum loss is 4,000 rupees. Now, since this contract is between a buyer and a seller, whatever is the profit of this buyer is the loss of the seller, and whatever is the loss of the buyer is the profit of the seller. So whatever is the maximum profit for this buyer is basically the maximum loss for the seller, which is minus infinity, and whatever is the maximum loss for the buyer is basically the maximum profit for the seller, that is 4,000 in this scenario. Similarly, for put options also, the maximum loss is going to be minus infinity and the maximum profit is going to be plus 4,000 rupees. Now let's see what is the capital required to carry out such transactions. For buyer, since at any given point of time is the maximum loss he can make is 4,000 rupees, so this person will be charged with only 4,000 rupees margin. And similarly for put option also, this person will be charged with a margin of 4,000 rupees. Whereas for seller, since he can have a loss of minus infinity, he will be charged with similar to whatever we are charging in futures. For this example, in futures we charged around 1 lakh rupees for a futures contract, right? So similarly, capital required to do option selling in this scenario would be 1 lakh rupees. Similarly, if you want to sell a put option, they will require a margin of 1 lakh rupees to carry out this transaction. Now let's look at the first statement which we spoke, that is whenever we hear about a term called option buying, the first thing that comes into our mind is unlimited profits. So by looking at the graph, yes, unlimited profits can be achieved, but in order to achieve that, the price of the stock should also go till infinity, which is almost impossible. But we might not achieve this plus infinity, but we can make huge sum of money if we have a huge up move in the share price. But this huge up move should also happen before 31st of January, because if it happens after 31st of January, the contract has expired and will not make that profit. And now let's see, why would someone carry out such transaction as a seller? So there is a buyer, there is a seller. Maximum profit is unlimited, whereas For seller, loss is unlimited, and maximum loss is only 4,000 for buyer, whereas it's only maximum profit of 4,000 for seller, and capital is almost 4,000 here and 1 lakh here. So the maximum profit and loss is also favorable for a buyer, where and the capital is also favorable for a buyer. Then why would someone enter into contract as a seller where they have they can make a unlimited profit and they have to pay a huge capital? So the reason why they carry out such transactions is probability of winning. So option buyer has a less probability of winning compared to option seller. So basically the second statement which we spoke, an option buyer only has a 33.33% chance of winning, whereas the seller has 66.66% chance of winning. Now let's see if these numbers are true or not. Now let's calculate the probabilities of a buyer and a seller. Since price was 5,000 and this was the break-even point, 5,020 rupees. Let's say this is a call option. So 5,020 is the break-even point and 5,000 is the current price. So let's say this distance is X and this distance is also X, as in the price can go till plus infinity or minus infinity. See, in real life scenario, the price can only go up till 0. But in order to make the calculations easier, let's say it's plus infinity and minus infinity. So, what is the probability of a option buyer to win? So, in order to win, this is the region for the option buyer to win. So the probability of winning is basically the numerator is this, which is x minus 20, right? X minus 20. And the denominator is basically x plus x, x plus x, that is x minus 20 divided by 2x. So this is equal to x by 2x minus 20 by 2x. So which is equal to half minus something, right? So half minus something, as in probability is basically 50% minus something that is less than 50%, right? Since we are subtracting something from 50%, the probability of a buyer to win is basically less than 50%, right? Similarly, now let's calculate for a seller. So for a probability of buyer is basically less than 50%. Now let's calculate the probability of seller. So to calculate the probability of seller, this was X and this was X. So the seller would win in this scenario, right? This is the scenario where the seller is going to win. So the probability is basically numerator is going to be this length, which is X plus this 20 rupees, right? The numerator is basically x plus 20 and the denominator is this entire thing, that is 2x plus x, which is 2x. So this is going to be x by 2x plus 20 by 2x, which is half plus something, right? So that is 50% plus something. So this is greater than 50%. So the probability of a seller to win is greater than 50%. Now let's see why did I mention 66 and 33.3 percentages. So in general what happens is people tell that the price can either go up or remain sideways or go down. So these are the three outcomes. In order to make a profit as an option buyer, the price should significantly move up, right? So this is the only outcome where the call option buyer is going to make a profit, and in these two scenarios the call option buyer is going to make a loss. So the profit of a buyer is basically 1, which is this case, divided by total number of outcomes, that is 1, 2 and 3. So 1 by 3, which is 33.33 percentages. Whereas the probability of a seller to win is, seller will win in these two scenarios, right? If the price does not move at all, which is sideways, or if the price goes down. In these two scenarios, the call option seller is going to win. So numerator is 2 divided by total number of outcomes is 3. 2 by 3, that is 66.66 percentages. So this is why people tell that the probability of a seller is 66.66% and a buyer is 33.33 percentage, whereas I like to stick with the concepts of greater than or less than 50%. So for a buyer and seller, profits are basically unlimited, loss is basically only limited. For a seller, loss is unlimited, whereas profit is limited. Capital is less for a buyer and high for a seller. But when we calculate probabilities, probability is high for a buyer, sorry, probability is less for a buyer and it is high for a seller to win. So these three scenarios are basically favorable for a buyer, but sellers get into such contracts because the probability is favorable for the seller. So that's it for today, guys. In the coming video, we'll talk about option Greeks.